I made a mistake. All right, this story is dramatically problematic. And it didn't get a huge amount of news in the United States. At the very least, it didn't seem like it got a huge amount of news. But it is a massive, massive deal that these guys are basically going in this direction. I started with the first story. Mariupol is about to fall. And I've been telling you that the Russians have basically been taking more and more of the territory. Now, this, again, if you're looking at the amount of losses that the Ukrainian military was having, if you meaning materials and everything else, it became very clear, not to mention the hysterical begging for more equipment and everything else that is coming as a direct result of them losing the equipment that they basically had. So much so, NATO is apparently running out in regards to being able to supply it for them. Mariupol, the Russian forces are basically, and the Russian allied forces, have been taking more and more and more of the territory. Western media has only now gotten around to understanding the dilemma that these guys are basically cut off. They're lacking supplies and lacking the ability to fight. Right here. Ukrainian officials are checking into reports that Russia may have used chemical weapons in the port city of Mariupol, Ukraine's Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Mailer said on Tuesday. Why would they need to do that? Why would they need to do that? Why would they need to do that? Think about what we're saying here for the moment. Why on earth, after taking the overwhelming majority of the territory and surrounding the territory and basically finishing off the last hardened, for all intents and purposes, neo-Nazis, I mean, this is the Azov Steelworks we're talking about, that they would all of a sudden, for what? Shits and giggles? Just to be a dick about it? Use a gas attack? Why would they need to do that? You've already had the situation where they were basically winning. And to make that point that much more clear before getting to the other point, Zelensky hasn't even backed that up. I mean, right here. This is when Zelensky even asked about it. Ukraine called on the West to impose strong, right here. There are unconfirmed reports on Monday suggesting chemical weapons were used in a besieged southern Ukrainian port of Mariupol. Quote, we treat this as the utmost seriousness, unquote, Zelensky said in a nightly video address on Monday. He did not say chemical weapons had already been used. There's that, right? You guys need to get your story straight. There's also this. Where is it? Right here. It was an attention-grabbing assertion that made headlines around the world. U.S. officials said they had indications that Russia might be preparing to use chemical weapons in Ukraine. President Joe Biden later said it publicly, but 3 U.S. officials told NBC News this week that there was no evidence that Russia bought any chemical weapons near Ukraine. They said the U.S. released the information to deter Russia from using bad munitions. In other words, they just made shit up. They just made it up. Ukraine is losing a war. From their standpoint, it is existential. The United States has been part of the government that knocked over the original democratically elected government of Ukraine and has been pushing this coup government into belligerence. And you have this situation now where the United States, Western media, is reconciling the fact that Mariupol is about to fall. And the troops, when they leave there, will go to other areas of the battlefield to finish off the encircled troops that are in the east. Or that further in the east, I should say. Look, I guess my point is this. They finally admit to this. And this can't be understated in regards to the defeat that this is going to represent. Not to mention, I mean, the numbers have been steadily decreasing, based on Russian figures at least. There were, 3,000 troops or something to that effect left in Mariupol. It's on the brink of collapse. That's the first point. Second point. There's nothing to back up the chemical weapons stuff, and a country that is losing a war and the bunch of other vassal states that are running in line with the country that helped put in that coup government. Well, will they use any? Oh, they're chemical weapons attack. Oh, they're just kicking puppies for no reason. Why are they just kicking these puppies? Even the rocket attack at the train station. When you're looking at the evidence for that, it seems that those were Ukrainian missiles, and Russia didn't even have those missiles in their inventory. I guess my point is, look, you're in the middle of a propagandistic war, and all of this stuff is just kind of par for the course. And the fact that the U.S. will put out an article where they're basically saying the administration has been lying all throughout this conflict makes me very skeptical of the shit that is coming out of the administration, or for that matter, the country that is losing that war. Here's the other thing that came out. The Senate approves a Lease bill to Ukraine. Let me repeat that. And let that sink in for a bit. The Senate of the United States has unanimously approved a Lend-Lease bill for Ukraine, including Barney fucking Sanders. Including Barney Sanders. And so, think about what that means. The Lend-Lease bill was the thing that basically preceded the United States getting into the Second World War. Is that where we are? Meaning, is that where we are in the context of this issue with Ukraine, where it costs that much, it matters that much, where we would literally get ourselves involved into a war with Russia over Ukraine? And why does this not raise alarm bells that it seems that we are steadily getting closer and closer? How do we know at the point where Russia considers the United States a belligerent? How do we know that? Meaning, yes, there's incentive for Russia to downplay U.S. involvement or involvement of mercenaries and stuff like that. But at a certain point, if the weapons that the United States is providing to Ukraine is getting to the point where it is, let's say, changing the context of the war or expanding the war into these kind of longer time frames, at what point does Russia consider these other countries that are providing these weapons belligerents? That is a question you really need to contemplate, especially if you're going to go down this particular pathway of, we're going to have a Lend-Lease plan with Ukraine. I have a few questions associated with that Lend-Lease plan. What weapons will you be sending to Ukraine to kill Russians? Meaning, what are the weapons that you're going to send in this very specific case, whether it's weapons or money? Ukraine was begging for money recently also. From that standpoint, will they be different than the weapons you've been sending currently that have not been working? And what I mean by working to the effect to kill Russians in a degree that you wanted to kill Russians. Will they be different? Now, if they will be different, will there be a time frame where you would need to train people on in order to use those weapons? Yay or nay? If there will be a time frame, how long would that time frame be? And if that time frame is going to be a long period of time, do you believe that you will be able to get those weapons, those people, those materials, that training done in time to get to the Donbass region in order to prevent the encirclement to continue, or preventing the cauldron from taking place and that finishing of that, and from getting there fast enough to prevent and avoid the annihilation of the Ukrainian military that is in that region? Understand, what the Russians want is to basically create a land bridge to Crimea, to make it clear that Crimea is Russian territory, to isolate and protect the Donbass and Luhansk republics. And at the point where that is accomplished, they will most likely come to the peace table and come to some kind of agreement in order to set up the new architecture of Europe, meaning security architecture of Europe. And in doing so, this kind of new economic layout of the global markets, and I have zero idea what that's going to look like at the end. The point that I'm making here in asking these questions, is this a good idea, is my basic point on this. Not to mention, do you expect Ukraine to pay you back? I mean, with the Lend-Lease program, Britain and Russia, or the Soviet Union, had to pay us back. Russia paid us back in gold, if I'm not mistaken, and Britain only finished paying back a few decades ago. So, do you expect whatever is left of Ukraine to return the money for the weapons? Do you expect that? Do you expect that? And again, the last time this happened, we ended up getting into a war. Now, I get that from the standpoint of us getting into the war, FDR wanted to get into that war. We were somewhat of a passive nation at that point, give or take. At the very least, we're far more skeptical of getting into these large wars or these kind of conquests. Hitler declares war on the United States, in which case FDR is allowed to get into the war. So fair enough, the dynamics are somewhat different. But you must understand, from Hitler's point of view, we were supplying weapons to the UK and Russia or Soviet Union anyway. Meaning, whether we declared ourselves combatants or whether we were in fact combatants in a truest technical sense of the word was almost irrelevant. The fact that we were supplying so much weapons and everything else with this idea, you'll pay us back later, get all the weapons, we need you to win that war. That's what we need to take place. We were combatants in that sense. Combatants may not necessarily be the right word for it, but we definitely were participants. We were part of the belligerents in that conflict. Hitler declaring war on the United States just kind of brought us in formally. Look, my basic point in this should have set off alarm bells. The idea that the Senate is going to create a Lend-Lease program with Ukraine as if that is existential for the United States. Are you insane? How much? I keep asking this question. How much is Ukraine worth? Meaning you, average person, going about your life. Is it really worth the inflation you're going to hit? Is it really worth the famine that we're going to see in various parts of the world? Is it really worth you not having certain materials and certain things on your store shelves? Is it worth the amount of money that you are going to be paying going forward on the issue of gas, on the issue of food? And for that matter, the level of inflation. Is it worth throwing the world, at the very least aspects of the West, into a recession? And for what? Because the U.S. wanted to play these kind of geopolitical games in order to keep Ukraine in its orbit, as opposed to being, let's say, more closely aligned with Russia. Is that all of this really worth that for a country that the majority of Americans couldn't even find on the map, that you're going to be paying all of this extra money in inflation, all of this extra money for food? And this is stuff that is not just going to hit us, it is going to hit Europe, and it is going to hit the world. We are heading into a shit and piss recession. And that is being done entirely provoked by the geopolitical aspirations of various people that was in this country and that was in NATO that did not want to let sleeping dogs lie. And instead of getting rid of that power projection device led by the United States and Europe, that they decided to basically go further and further and further to push the envelope. And this is now where we are, where we're on the Russian border. The United States is basically taking a war footing in regards to the level of propaganda and has now started a Lease program to give them all the weapons and munitions that we could possibly give them to kill as many Russians as we could possibly kill them. There's something that this article writes that is just utterly farcical. Nobody believes that Ukraine is going to win this war. Nobody believes that. Nobody. Not even the countries that are sending them weapons believe it. The reason that they're sending them weapons is to bleed the Russians white. The entire point of it is, look, you're going to lose that war. But at the very least, it needs to be costly to the Russians for you to lose it. And that needs to be costly in materials and manpower, etc., etc. We need to bleed them white, just like we did in Afghanistan. It worked once. Let's see it work again. Only in this very specific case, it doesn't necessarily seem like Ukraine has a bang for the buck to actually get the job accomplished. In lieu of them getting the job accomplished, plan 2, bleed them white. Fight to the last dead Ukrainian. Every dead person can be used for telegenic purposes in order to say, hey, look at this person that have just died as a result of what the Russians have done. Despite the fact that none of those people show up at the Yemen war. None of those people show up at the governments we've knocked over in Iraq and Libya and Syria, or at the very least try to in Syria. Not to mention the blood gangs that we would have, the kill squads in South America. We knocked over Iran and don't even acknowledge that nonsense. I guess the point that I'm making here, it's pretty goddamn rich that there will be so much attention lavished on one and all of the other ones are ignored. And just like the Tillerson memo thing, the point of it is there's certain countries that are allies, there's certain countries that are not. In this very specific case, Russia is not. And China is considered an existential threat. Those two countries are basically allies. That is a problem for us. We need to do something about that. In this very specific case, doing something about that was trying to get into this fait accompli militaristic position where any conflict with Russia at that point will be an overwhelming military advantage by the various NATO nations that are surrounding the country. Like, share, and of course, subscribe. This is a big deal. Pay attention to this. Have a good one, guys.